Hey, this is Wes. In this video, we're going to be taking a look at Substance Modeler. I'm going to be creating a simple wood barrel, and simple is the key. We want to learn the basics of Modeler by creating an actual object, and in this case, it's going to be something simple. And that means that we're not going to have to go through every single button in the UI, covering every single workflow. We're just going to create what we need to cover the basics. So with that said, let's jump in and take a look. So here I have the tool palette and I'm on the clay tool, and you can see I have a list of primitives because we're working with a barrel. Let's start here with the cylinder. Now I can orbit around in the viewport, works just like Substance Painter. Alt left click, I can orbit around. Alt middle click, I can pan, and Alt right mouse button, I can zoom in and out. All right, so first thing I want to do is maybe set up what my overall kind of block-in mesh is going to be. I like to nail down the size first. And here I have my tool and I have these little nodes that are going to allow me to basically change or scale the shape. This node that's sitting here on the outside of the gizmo is going to allow me to scale uniformly. So I left click and drag, I scale this guy up and down, keeping an eye here on the slider value. So I'm going to zoom out. Let's scale this guy up. I'm going to maybe reach this around, I'm looking at it maybe around 0.68 meters. That's going to be around 68 centimeters. And that scale is going to represent the overall diameter of the barrel. Now, again, using my gizmo, I'm just going to position here. I'm just making a quick move here on the Z-axis. I'm going to position the barrel so that it's just sitting here on the grid. All right, so now that I have that in place, I have my diameter set. I'd like to set the size of the height. And so to do that, I'm going to come over here to this little node that represents my scale for the Z-axis. I can hold down the control key, left click and drag to just move that node independently of the rest of the shape. Again, keeping an eye here on my size. And look at that, I nailed it right there, 0.88. That's what I was looking for, 88 centimeters. All right, so at this point, I have the shape or the tool set, and I'm just about ready to create my actual first piece of clay. Now, before I do this though, I'd like to make a few other tweaks here to the shape parameters. I think I'll just introduce just a little bit of fillet here on the edge. And then I like to right click to get to my actions panel and I look at the resolution. When I mouse over this, I can start to see this checker pattern, which indicates the level of quality we'll say that this shape is going to represent. Now, Substance Modeler is working with a signed distance field or SDF based on a grid that's super technical. So the best way to think about it is just in terms of pixels. Just like in Photoshop, you have pixels that make up the size of your canvas. The more resolution, the more pixels that you're giving it, the better quality. In our case, the more mesh density. So as I increase the resolution, the grid pattern gets smaller. That means it's going to be a denser mesh. And if I click the minus button, the grid panel gets larger. That means less resolution, and I get a less dense mesh. So here, I'm just going to balance it. Maybe something like this looks pretty good. And now that that's all set, I can hit my space bar, which is like my action button, and that is going to create the piece of clay. So now I actually have some clay here, and I have a shape, a cylinder, and this is my overall kind of block in size of my barrel. So now I don't really need this entire centerpiece. I'd like to cut that out. And a great way to do that would be to jump over here to my eraser tool. I can just hit E on the keyboard to get to the eraser. And everything that's inside this eraser shape volume, which is going to be the exact shape of the cylinder tool that I just created, is going to be erased or removed when I hit the action button, which is our space bar. So what I'm going to do is just scale this guy up a little bit. I'll use my little Z-axis node. I'm not holding down the control key, which means I can actually work here in a uniform fashion on that Z-axis. And I'm just going to push this erase tool. You can see this little intersection line. It's giving me a good idea of where that volume is going to be placed. And I just want to leave a top and bottom here for the barrel. So that looks pretty good. Here's where I'll hit the space bar, perform the erase operation. And here you can see again where that volume has been removed. And now I have just the top and bottom. I can hit the V key to kind of jump out here to my select tool. And there we go. We have our clay, we have our top and bottom end of the barrel. So the next thing I want to do is create a wood plank that I'm going to repeat to create around the outside and inside of the barrel. So to do that, I'm going to right click once more to open up my actions panel, and I'm going to click this new layer button. That creates a new layer. It activates my clay tool. and the last tool that I had option, or the last primitive, which was cylinder. Okay, so that's pretty good, but I don't want a cylinder for a plank. Let's click the cube this time. And now I'm gonna go in and manipulate my shape before I create the clay. So here I'm gonna use the gizmo to reposition, and I'm gonna use the little nodes here on the gizmo to set the scale and size and shape of what I want this cube to be. And you can see we're actually turning this into a wood plank at this point. So here I'll grab the Y axis and move it out from the origin, because when I do my repeat, the reason I'm doing this is because when I do my repeat, which you'll see here in a moment, it's going to repeat around that origin point in this particular case because of the way I've constructed this barrel so far, everything at the origin. So I can go ahead and just move this out. Now let's just zoom here towards the bottom. I have this little node. I'm gonna hold down the control key so that I can strain this just to the bottom, and I'll move this down so that I can see here that it's just, flush here with the bottom of the barrel. And I can see that I do need to move this closer. So let's do that. Okay, that looks pretty good for the bottom. Let's set the top. Again, hold down the control key, click my little node, drag it up. I'm gonna give myself just a little bit of extra room here for now. So you can see I'm going above the top of the barrel, but that'll be okay. Let's do something like that. All right, now that that is in place, I'm going to play around a little bit. Let's just round the edges. So I want to get a little bit of rounding here. It's really nice to create a little bevel edge like this because it really can help capture the light when we actually go to render this later. So here I will just go ahead and set that little bit of a roundness. Let's also add a little bit of a fillet to my shape, and that looks pretty good. Now, last thing I like to do, just right click, bring up my actions panel, and let's take a look at that resolution. So I just mouse over the plus button here and I can see the resolution. Grid panel's pretty low. You can see that it's actually a little bit larger than what I have for the rest of the barrel, the top at this point. So I'm just gonna add a little bit more resolution to that for now, and then click the space bar to create that piece of clay. Let me go over to my select tool, and now I have this primitive shape, which is going to represent the plank for my barrel. I can always change the resolution also. So if I come over here and right click again, you can see that if I wanted to decrease the resolution after I've created the clay, it's easy to do. I just click the plus button, and you can see I can move up and down here. So you can change resolution whenever you need to, which is pretty cool. All right, so now that I have that in place, I have two layers. I have the top and bottom of the barrel, and I have a single plank. I want to duplicate this wood plank so that it goes all the way around the barrel and it basically creates the outside and inside for me. So to do that, we're gonna right click, brings up our action menu once again. I come over here to the symmetry and repetition actions. And then under repetition, we have an option here to toggle radial repetition, exactly what I want to do. I'll click the button, and now you can see that I have this radial repetition that's actually has its origin point set to the origin of the grid. Now, I'm going to come over here to the repetition amount. Let's click this button here to increase it. So I'm just going to increase it by a lot until we basically, cover the entire barrel. It looks like the number 21 is going to be the number that we need. So now when I just click away, you can see that, we start to have our barrel. We have our top and bottom, and we have the sides. So there we go. We have a barrel. It's not awesome. It's just a cylinder. What we need to do is now start to warp this plank. So what I want to do is I want to actually introduce a little bit of a bend here to the plank. So for example, the shape that I really want to create is maybe something a little bit more like this. And we're going to use the warp tool here in Modeler to help us produce this effect. So let's take a look at how that's going to work. All right, so what we're going to do is select our plank. Now, one of the great things about using that repetition is that all of the planks are basically instances, and they are now going to be linked. So I can do some operations just on this single plank. You can see here I'm just rotating. I can, rescale it and do things, and all the other planks are going to update for me, which is pretty cool. But what we're going to do is an actual warp. So I can jump over here to my tool palette, and I'm going to select the warp tool, which is just the W key on the keyboard. So now that we have that, you can see that I have what looks like a brush. Now, this placement is indicated here by the placement mode that you have selected. And when you jump into a tool, it's going to set itself to this surface placement mode. So like I said, think of it like a brush. If I hold down the control key and use my left mouse button, I can scale this brush size up and down. So for example, let's scale it up. Let's just left click and drag. I start to do a warp. When I let go of my mouse, that warp has been propagated to all of the other planks. Pretty cool. Now, another really quick technique here that you can use is I can actually warp based on the surface normal. So if I hold down the Z key and then click and drag, I'm actually performing this warp based on the surface normal. So here I can make sure that this warp is pushing out right from the surface normal, let go of my mouse, and here you can see that we're getting that warped result propagating again to all of the other planks. Looks pretty good. So what I could do, let's scale this guy all the way up. Let's hold down the Z key, left click and drag, and there we get that nice kind of bend that I was wanting. So that's an option. We could go in and do that. However, there's another way of working with this tool. So let me just Control Z to undo that. Let me hit W to go back into my warp tool. And we have another option, which is called the Gizmo mode. So I can hit the G key on the keyboard to toggle between Gizmo and surface mode. You're going to do that a lot when you're working with Modeler. Here you can see that all that keyboard shortcut is just changing between the two different placement modes. So for example here, now I'm in Gizmo. What I can do is now manipulate the Gizmo so I can position it. It actually has a little bit of a rotation, and that is actually being inherited from the rotation from the actual surface position. So for example, when I was just using the surface mode, let's say we just mouse over in this area, then I hit G, it takes me to the Gizmo, I can see that there's a little bit of rotation to this, again, coming from that surface normal. So in order to fix that, what I could do is just tap the R key on my keyboard, and that's just going to reset here that rotation. So really quick way to use the surface tool to position. So surface tool, I can position, hit G, there I have my Gizmo, hit R to set my reset, and I'm ready to go. So that's a kind of a quick way of working here in Modeler. But what we're going to do, again, I hit the R key to reset that. I can now scale this up, so I can grab my little scale control here. I can also use the little slider, or I can hold down the Control key and left mouse button to scale this guy up. So for example, what we could do, and you can see here that we have this little intersection. This lets me know where the fall off from this warp tool, this is where that's going to take place. So if I hold down the space bar, which is my action button here in Modeler, hold down space bar, now the tool's activated, click and drag on an axis, now I'm performing the warp. And you can see that that warp is falling off right where that intersection line is here on that warp. So that's a great way to kind of gauge how that's going to work. And then also here, when you're using the warp, we have this hardness slider. So if I increase the hardness value, we get this second sphere, which again is showing me this fall off for the hardness. Just look at the difference here. We'll hold down the space bar, click and drag, and now I get a different type of shape. Here again, looking at these intersecting lines, I can see where that fall off is taking place here. So again, this could be a great way to make different types of shapes. Okay, let's Control Z that once more. And one of the other things I want to bring to your attention here, I'm going to hold down the space bar. I'm going to perform a warp. Oh, that time I'm performing it on everything. Let me just jump back into my shape here. You'll notice that the type of curve fall off that we get with the warp tool is an S curve. And at the recording of this video, we don't have a way to change that. So there's not a different interpolation curve that I can use. I'm kind of stuck with this S curve. But a way to work around that is to simply scale up the tool. So I'm holding down Control, left mouse button, scaling up the tool so that the S, that S curve fall off is happening way out here. And really the bending, the warping is happening at kind of the apex of that curve. And this is the type of result that I would get. So that's really what I'm looking to do, just like that. So I'm going to just scale that or undo that. Let me scale it down slightly. And there we go. I think I want more of a warp like this. So now I'll hit the V key to go back to my tool, and I can see that I've performed this warp. Now, it's basically the warp has, distorted the planks. They're all kind of separated. So no problem. Back in my Gizmo mode, I can just grab hold of my Y axis and just push forward. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to perform that action until I can see the planks at the top and bottom are just going to intersect. So let's just do something like that. We'll just intersect those guys together. So really, they're just kind of touching. And that takes care of the top and bottom. But now we have the middle part where I can see a gap between the planks. And I need to fix that. Okay, so to fix that issue, I'm going to select my plank and I'm going to hit the W key to jump into my warp tool. And here I'm going to do a warp on both sides of this plank to basically fill in that gap. And in this particular case, using that S-curve fall off is going to come in really handy because you can see here that I don't want to have any of the warp affected here at the top or the bottom. And then I want that to quickly kind of just in an S-curve fashion, just slope in and get more intense here towards the middle. Now, like I said, I want to perform this warp on both sides of the plank. So I'm going to right click to get to my actions panel and then come over here to symmetry and let's enable symmetry. Now, when I grab hold of my X-axis handle and move the warp, you can see that I'm doing a symmetrical operation here, which is going to be perfect for the plank. So now it's a matter of just looking at these intersection lines, seeing where that fall off is going to be. So I'm going to do something like that, maybe scale it up a little bit. And now I can hold down my action button, grab hold of the axis, and then you can see that I'm performing this warp here if I move this back and forth, mainly on that center area. And here it's just a matter of maybe a little trial and error. Let's see if I can get this to line up, so that it matches pretty well. So let's see what that does. So here I've closed that gap just a little bit too much. No problem. We'll just undo that, hit W to go back to our warp. And then here I'm just going to move and we'll let go. Let's see how this does. All right, that's a lot better. I think I could probably go with that. And you know what? Yeah, maybe I'll give it one more try. Let's see. I'm going to undo this, go into my warp. Okay, there we go. That's looking pretty good. I'm super happy with that result. So now I have my barrel, I have my wood planks. They've been warped and bent to give me that nice kind of shape. I have my top and bottom of the barrel. So here, I only grab that barrel bottom. I'm just going to push it up slightly here on the Z-axis. And the next thing I want to do is start to create some of these rings that are going to go around the barrel. So to do that, I'm going to right click and I'm going to open up my actions panel and let's create yet another new layer. So when I create a new layer, I can see that it's already, switched the clay tool and it remembers the last time that I had basically my tool set up. It's in this kind of plank. I don't want that. This time I'm going to go back to my cylinder shape. So I'm going to click here to create my cylinder shape. And then I'm going to hit the R key on the keyboard just to reset it right to the center origin. So let's move this guy up. We can scale it, again, using that control left mouse button, just a quick way to scale. And then again, I'm going to use these little nodes just to block in this overall shape. Now, this is just a cylinder shape, so it has like a solid core, and I don't want that for this ring. So I can jump over here to the shape parameters, and let me just make a quick adjustment here to the thickness. So I'm going to do something like that. So now I have this kind of thickness. It's not an actual solid shape. Perfect for a ring. So let me position it here. Let me grab this little node here for the bottom Z-axis and just move it up. And I think I'm going to go with something like that for this top ring. All right, so let's right click. Let's take a look at the overall resolution. I think that's going to be fine. And also maybe my thickness is a little too much, but instead of adjusting the thickness, I think at this point I'll just scale it. So control left click and just scale it in. And I think that looks pretty good. But now you can see that we have this problem where we're getting this intersection here and we need to fix that. But we'll do that in a second step. For now, I think this is going to work for my overall shape. Let me just dial in some fillet here just to get a nice little beveled edge. And I'll hit the space bar to go ahead and create that piece of clay. Now we have that problem where the clay is intersecting with the wood panels. Well, no problem for us because we're just going to hit the W key to jump into our warp tool. And instead of using the sphere, this time I'm going to use a cube. And we're going to position the cube. And just like I did previously, we are going to use this intersection line to determine where we want this to fall off. And the hardness value, again, we could increase the hardness value, but we want this to be, completely soft, zero hardness. And I'm going to position here this fall off line. Again, we know that's going to work in an S-curve pattern. So I'm going to position this up just a little bit higher, maybe towards the top here, the kind of the lip area of this ring. Now, a cool trick is I want to do a uniform scale. I know I can do that by clicking and dragging on this little node that I have here. Well, I can also apply action to this, just like moving the handles here on the gizmo. So if I hold down the space bar to activate kind of action mode, and I click and drag on this node, here you can see that I'm just doing a scale. So I'm just going to click and drag, and just scale that off, just kind of flare it out a little bit. Now you can see that we just have this little edge. And that is going to take care of the ring here for the top. Now I want to do a ring for the bottom. Instead of creating a new piece, in my select tool, I'm going to select the ring. I'll hit Control D to duplicate this, and then I'll just use the gizmo to move it down here towards the bottom. Now, one thing that we have, because of the way that we did the warp, we really need to kind of flip this ring upside down. So I could just come over here to the Y-axis ring on the gizmo, click and drag and rotate this guy. So I could do that and try to line it up. Let me hit Control Z to undo that. But a really quick trick to getting this to rotate or flip it 180 degrees is just to hold down the Control key, and then I can click just once. So a single left click, you can see it's going to flip it in 45 degrees. So 2 clicks, and I have that flipped. It's a really great handy trick. I use that quite a bit. All right, let's take care of the center ring. This time we're going to right click, create a new layer. And as you recall, the layer and the tool is going to be set to that cylinder, and it's already going to be set up to the exact shape I made before, which is perfect. So I'm going to hold down the Control key, left click and drag to scale that ring up. And I'm going to position that here in the center of the barrel. Now, I don't think I want this ring to be as thick or as tall. So what I'm going to do is just grab hold of the little node on the Z-axis and just shrink that in a little bit. I want this to be just a little bit of a smaller ring. That looks pretty good. So I'll hit the space bar to create that piece of clay. And while I'm here, I'm just going to go ahead and move my tool up and do the same thing, Control left click and drag, and just kind of set this into place. Now I can see that, you know what, I could probably use my warp tool again. So what I'm going to do in this case is maybe just create this into a new layer. Right now, because these two objects are shaded, they have the same shading, I know that they're in the same layer. So I'm going to right click and create a new layer. So now you can see that I'm in a new layer. This new ring it's all on its own. I'll hit the space bar to create a piece of clay here. The only reason I'm doing this and separating it out into a layer is because, it's just a little easier to deal with things. Then I'll hit the W key to get my warp. Using that same exact transformation, let's go ahead and line that piece up, round to the lip, hold down the space bar, click and drag my scale, and just flare that out just a little bit. And that'll take care of that ring. Now let's do the same thing once again. Select the ring, Control D. Let's move it down here towards this lower section. I want to flip it. So Control, left click, and there we go. We have a flip. And at that point, we've pretty much finished most of our barrel. We have the top, the bottom, the wood planks, the rings, and we're good to go. Okay, so now that we have the rings, the next thing I would like to do would be to start to create some rivets to place around these rings. And one of the things, just to add a little bit of extra detail and also cover a few more basics, is I'd like to basically make a cut through each one of these rings, right? So that we basically have kind of a start and end to the ring, and then the rivets are in place right along the sides of where that cut is. So let's do this in a couple different steps. First thing I'd like to do is maybe take all the rings and group them together. So I can select a ring, hold down the Shift key, left click, and just, select all the objects here. And now with everything selected, you can hit Control G or right click, open up the Actions panel and choose Group. So that groups everything together. So with everything in one group, I could grab hold of my widget, and you can see I can rotate and move these guys around wherever I need them to be. And it's pretty cool that I can, have these objects as part of one group. If I needed to duplicate these guys, Control D, and then here you go, I've got a duplication of that group. So pretty interesting. So now that we have these grouped, like I said, what I want to do is I want to just put a cut line in every one of these rings. So I'm going to, instead of doing it individually, let's try to do it all in one step. So what we'll do is, or we'll say in one cut. So let's right click and let's create a new layer. And on this new layer, I'm going to jump over to my clay tool, and I can see that it's, reset here to my cube. I want to use a primitive, and I'm going to create a cutting tool. So I'm just going to make this box or this object here pretty big. We'll make sure that it encompasses the entire barrel. And I'm really only interested here in this width value. So I'm going to make this, pretty thin here. It's going to be my cut. And again, I just want this to intersect through all of the rings, because we're just going to put like a cut dividing line between them. And so this will probably work. The resolution doesn't really matter, but I'm just checking it anyways. I'll just give it one resolution up. And then here I'm going to hit my space bar to create this piece of clay. Now with my select tool, I can select this object. And the first thing you need to do is we need to denote that this is going to be a cutting object, because now we're going to start working with Booleans here in Substance Modeler. So to do that, we right click and I come over here to my Actions panel. Down here towards the bottom, we have these tabs. We have Symmetry, our visibility actions and our Boolean actions. And then here under the Booleans, we have some operations, things like subtract, which is what we want to use. And then we also have a couple other options like intersect and join or union. So now that this is set up, what I need to do is I've tagged this as a Boolean object. I now need to select the object I want to cut into, which is going to be my grouped rings. So with all that set up, I just hit right click, actions panel, and then just simply click apply. And if we now take our Boolean object here and we just move it, you can see that we've just placed this cut in between all of the different rings. And that's all I needed to do, right? So I don't really need this Boolean object. It stays tagged as that, which is pretty cool because if I wanted to be able to use this anywhere else, I could do so. I could just position it, select an object or whatever it is, and then right click and hit apply. That would do the Boolean again. If I maybe want to use this for something else, I can right click and just hit done, and that'll basically remove that Boolean tag from this object. But in my case, I don't need it at all. Let's just select it and delete it. So now we have our rings. Something else we can do is we need to just basically jump into each one of these rings. And right now it's all lined up. I don't want that. I'm just gonna, just rotate these, add a little bit of random rotation to this. So one of the things that you can do is you can move in and out of layers by just simply double clicking the layer you want to go into. So for example, let's say I want to operate on this ring. I can double click and now I'm inside that layer. Everything else is grayed out. If I want to get to a different layer, what I can do is just simply double click on it. There's another way that you can work here through layers, because you'll notice here in Substance Modeler, we don't have this hierarchical view. We don't have an outliner. You basically have layers, and it works like in a real workshop. I'm on a table and I have a bunch of pieces of clay. If I want to work on a piece of clay, I just, use my hand, I grab the clay and I'm working on it. That's kind of the mindset that I have when I'm working here inside of Modeler. So let me show you something kind of cool. What you can do as a keyboard shortcut is, let's say that I want to go into this layer and it's out on a group, right? Well, if I mouse over the layer, just mouse over it and hit S, I can jump right into that layer. So here I've gone into a layer, I'll hit S again, and I'm in another layer. So now that I'm inside this layer, like for example, if I want to grab, say, this cube, now here's a cool trick. I want to position the cube really quickly. I'll hit G. This takes me to surface mode. I'll place it here. I'll hit G again to go to my gizmo, R to reset, Control left click to scale it down. And now I'm able to reposition this new piece of clay that I want to add. So for example, and I'm going to undo this. Let's just say that I wanted to add a piece of clay here. I'll hit space bar and we move this guy away. You can see that it's gone ahead and fused that piece of clay to here, and I'm inside this layer. But let's say that now I want to jump to this top layer. Well, all I have to do is mouse up, hit S, and I'm there. Now I can grab this gizmo tool, G. Let's use the surface tool to basically align it. Hit G again to go to my gizmo. And now I'm going to reposition this guy. So I'll hit R to set my rotation. And again, you can see I'm just using my gizmo to get into place. So what I'm showing you there is just some really quick ways to kind of work here inside of Modeler. So let's say that we do something like this, and then I'll add a little bit of roundness. I mean, this is just a test, right? And then I'll hit space bar, and we've kind of fused that piece into here as well. So just a really quick way of working. Again, I want to come down to this guy. I just hit S and I'm there in that layer. I want to go back to a layer. I just mouse over. I'm just pointing where I want to go and I hit S and I'm there. So that's basically how the layering kind of works. And we call that scoping. All right. So with all that said, all I wanted to do was just create this little line. Now I'm just going to select each one of these pieces individually. And just here on the Z-axis rotation, I'm just going to rotate these guy, just to add a little bit of randomness to this. I don't want that cut line to be lined up exactly everywhere, just, perfectly. So here I'm just adjusting this a little bit here. Put that guy right there and just making a few little rotations. Okay, there we go. So now we have that in place. If I want to get all the way out to my root or my home, I can just double click in an empty area. Or down here in my scene view, I can start to see a little bit of how these objects are relating. So I know I have a group and I have a world. If I just click world, I'm out here to the world. The last step that we want to do here is add these little rivet points, right? So what I'm going to do is, once again, I'm going to right click and I'm going to create a new layer. Let's look at this gizmo, and it's a cube once again. I don't really want that. I'm going to grab a cylinder. I'm going to hit my control key and then just left click to flip it, because this is what I'm trying to create here is just a little bit of a rivet. And I'm going to play with the fillet option. So I want to just kind of round that a little bit. And then let's right click and take a look at that resolution. You can see it's super low. So let me just click a few times in my resolution just to kind of update this. And honestly, for what I'm doing here, that's going to work. So at this point, I'm in the Gizmo mode. And I could, if I wanted to, like I said before, I could move this around, axis by axis here and just position it. Or this is a great spot to use the placement mode here of surface. So to get to it really quickly, I hit the G key. Now I'm in surface mode. Once I'm in surface mode, I can hold down the control key and left click. I'm going to scale this rivet down. And then here, I can just click to add this piece of clay now. So now it's like I'm in a paintbrush mode. So click, and you can see now I'm just adding this clay, and I know that it's going to line up directly on the surface like I want. Perfect. That's a great way to work with these rivets. So you can see what I'm doing here is I'm just kind of rotating around to find out where I have these little lines. And on these thinner ones, I'm just going to put, 2 rivets on the side. And let's come over to this guy. Let's see here. A couple rivets. And we'll come over to this side. Let's add a couple more here. And then towards the bottom, I'm going to do the same thing that I did at the top. Let's add a set of 4 here. So 2 and 2. And there we go. We have our rivets. We'll go out to our world view. And at that point, we have our barrel. This is looking pretty cool. And we're pretty much set. All right, so one last thing I want to do is I want to create a cap here for the top of the barrel. So I'm going to just mouse over here to the top. I'll hit S just to jump into that layer. And I'm going to grab my cylinder and move this up. You can see that I'm actually in my erase tool, which is going to be fine. And I'm just going to position here this eraser tool. Now, actually, I'm going to hit the C key to go into clay so I can get an idea of what this is going to look like. So here, let me just move this shape up. I'm going to design the shape first. So let's come in and let's play around with the fillet. So I want to put a nice little bevel on this. We can even use something like maybe a chamfer. Actually, that looks pretty cool. Let me do that. All right, so I have this in place. I'm going to hit the E key to go to my erase mode, and I'm just going to push this down here into the surface. So we'll get something like that. That's just going to be my little opening. Now, I could just hit the space bar, which would just cut a hole into this piece. But instead of doing that, I want to be able to have this cap left behind as like an extra part. And so there's this really nice functionality of the eraser tool, which is called the split tool. So again, it's under the eraser tool, and there's an option called split. Once you jump into split and we hit our space bar, you can see that what it does is it actually creates the hole, and then it leaves a little part behind. So if we jump back out, you can see that what I have right now is this little lid or this little piece here, and I can move this up and down. So that's just a kind of a quick way to do something like that. However, in my case, it kind of cut out that little lid, the little chamfer that I did. So maybe split wasn't going to work in that case. So what I would do, let's jump back. Let's hit my space bar here. Whoops, I'm still on split. Let's go back to erase. Let's erase. And then let's go back to clay, right click, new layer, and then create that piece of clay here. And I can see my resolution was pretty low on that. So I'm just going to undo that and take a look. And I'm just going to increase that resolution amount here. So we'll do something like that. And then I'll hit my space bar. Whoops. I need to bust that out onto its own layer. Space bar, create that piece. And now I can position this as I want. So we could do something like that. And maybe that's just like a little, lid for the top. And then I can see my resolution was a little low around that edge. So no problem. Once that's selected, I can just increase that resolution here. And then if I needed to, I could jump into the tool and hold down the shift key, and that takes me into a smoothing. So now I'm just going to smooth that little corner here. All right, so just running a little bit of a smooth operation, and there we go. Looks pretty good. Okay, so at this point, I have my barrel. It's completely modeled and ready to export. So let's talk about the export process. So now, once I have the model, I would come up here to File, and I can choose to export. And that's going to open up my export dialog. So here we have our format, lots of options, USD, FBX. In my case, I would export out in FBX. I built everything to scale, so leaving this at meters is going to be fine. The up axis, I can switch. I'm going to leave it to auto, and I do want to export all my layers. Now, the big thing you want to focus on is this topology. So, what's the polygon type? So in the end, we are going to actually export out geometry. So here I have several options. I can do raw triangles. I can do triangles. Raw triangles is going to be, just a very high level of data here. So that's going to be a pretty dense mesh. But if I switch it to triangles, then I have a target poly count, and I can say, you know what, I just want this to be, a certain level of resolution. Or I could do quads, which is going to use quad remesher to actually do a quad remesh to create, an all quad topology. So that's another option. Again, you set a target poly count. And then finally, you have the option to do UV map triangles, and you can optimize that towards a hard surface object. And that's going to produce some UV mapping. In my case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to end up taking this into Substance Painter and do some texturing, and I'm going to let Substance Painter handle the UVs. So what I'll do is probably just switch this to triangles, and I'm going to set this up to a triangle count. Maybe, I'm just dragging the slider here. I'm going to probably do something like 800,000 or so. And you can, export and play with this and find out what you need for the given resolution that you want to work with for your end product. Now, here on the additional options, I usually check this export hidden content because you can hide objects. I don't want to do that. I will go ahead and flatten the hierarchy. I have no vertex colors that I want to use. Preserve instances. I'm not going to do that. And then positive transforms only. I usually keep that on in case inside of Modeler you did some kind of duplication and flip. We didn't do that in this video, but just for safety's sake, I usually just keep this on. And then once that's done, you hit export. And then in my case, because I have triangles, Modeler is going to do a decimation, and it's going to export me an FBX that I could then take into Substance Painter for some texturing. So that's going to conclude this video on Substance Modeler and creating a simple object like this wood barrel. My next step would be to take this into Substance Painter for some texturing. Thanks a lot for watching, and I'll see you next time.